So greetings, hello everyone, welcome to our philosophy club here in sleepy La Creuse in the middle of France. Bonjour à tous, et c'est Pâques aujourd'hui, so we're going to do something slightly different than normal to celebrate. It's Easter Sunday, so I thought we ought to do something a bit different. We'll start off the same. I'm going to do a little summary of the week and what's going on in world politics from a spiritual perspective, and generally what's been happening. And it's the important end of the month. So this week I've been quite busy as usual in my piecework. Attended a lecture by a professor of philosophy on Monday the 25th, which is a full moon. A chap called Philip Goff, who is based at the University of Durham. He was speaking to the Scientific and Medical Network, which I belong to. Well done, Philip. He's written a book about panpsychism. So he believes that the ancient idea, really it's a kind of weird way of rebranding animism. The idea that everything is alive. Earth, air, fire, water, humans, animals, sun, moon. Everything has got a sort of psychic undercurrent flowing through it, and he argues that even particles in electrons and neutrons have got some level of consciousness. So everything is vibrant with consciousness. And he reckons that he can prove this scientifically. So he's written a complicated book drawing on science and drawing on philosophy. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of Durham, which I know well, where St Cuthbert is buried, in the cathedral there. So anyway, it's interesting. There's a debate among philosophers whether they ought to bring back panpsychism. The alternative is a completely inert, dead universe in which nothing is conscious apart from human brains, human beings. And that still remains the conventional scientific view. If you go and study science at a university in the UK or America, that's what you'll be taught. Sort of post-Darwinian, everything is dead, and the universe just happened by chance. The atoms all came together out of the Big Bang, which happened by chance. Nobody knows why it happened, and there's no purpose in that vision of the universe. There's no reason for anything. It's just like chance, fluke that we're here. And consciousness has arisen as an epiphenomena that there's no reason why it's here. It's just here. So anyway, Philip is a protester against that, bless him. He's saying, no, that model of the universe, which official science promotes, is no longer tenable. And he gives some mathematical reasons why it's no longer tenable. And it was very interesting hearing his talk. He's a young philosopher with a young family, and his kids were going to bed. It's quite sweet to see young philosophers thinking, in this way. And I wish him well. Because I agree with that model. I think there are other arguments that he put forward, which I made a comment at the end to him, which are even stronger than the ones he put forward. But, at least he's courageous enough to have that debate. Okay, so then what else? So on Tuesday, the 26th, I joined a conference run from Geneva by some friends of mine, chaired by Alan Ware, who's one of the world's leading anti-nuclear weapons campaigners, based in New Zealand, where he campaigned against nuclear weapons in New Zealand and was successful. They got rid of them. They've created a thing called MEGA, M-E-G-A, which means Mobilizing for an Earth Governance Assembly. And it sort of sounds like Omega. I think it's deliberately chosen, which is the Alpha and Omega is like the end of the world. Omega is when everything comes clear, and it's in the book of Revelations in the Bible when Christ says he's the Alpha and the Omega. So anyway, I think they chose it deliberately. It was a very good conference. It had some brilliant speakers. It had Mary Robinson, who's the former President of Ireland, speaking about her work for planetary governance. Their argument is that the world is facing an emergency with global warming and all the knock-on effects of that, and that our governance structures, the UN, the nation states, even things like the EU, are not robust enough to cope with it. We don't know. And also, some nation states are really, just adding to the problems by going to war, like Israel and Russia and others. So therefore they're suggesting we need a sort of a new level of global governance that will kick in. And this is what I've been saying with the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum for the last 3 years. We've been having meetings and discussions about this. The question is, what structure should that take? How would it get its authority? Where would it be governed from? How would it sit with normal people? They'll say, oh God, another level of bureaucracy, more taxes. You know, there's a lot of resistance to governance. But anyway, it was an interesting meeting and raised lots of issues. Some brilliant minds were there, Mary Robinson, Allen, and also a chap who's an elder of the environmental movement, who was involved in conferences going back to the 70s and even 60s, Dr. Arthur Dahl, D-A-H-L, who spoke brilliantly, and some younger activists as well. So that was quite heartening. And then, things followed on from that, and lots of interesting discussions have taken place since. Yesterday we had our monthly meeting of the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum, which had people from actually all different parts of the world joining in, and we discussed in the state of the world what we can do as intellectuals and thinkers. So, there's a lot to do. One of the people that spoke at the Omega meeting, I'll call it, John Vlasto, lives in London. He's chair of the World Federalist Movement, which I belonged to for many years when I was starting in Canada. And he was quite a good speaker as well. So I've also been watching a series that I recommend to people. It's appeared on Netflix out of the blue. It's about the Cold War. It's a very detailed historical documentary on the Cold War, which is what I studied for my PhD thesis. And it's looking at the nuclear arms race, how close we've come to nuclear Armageddon many times over Cuba. There was a whole episode devoted to Cuba. There was one to, these accidents. I mean, statistically, it's highly likely that an accident will trigger a nuclear exchange between the superpowers, which remains Russia and America in nuclear terms. It's a miracle that it hasn't happened so far. There's a famous incident when a Russian Colonel Petkov was in the bunker and it flashed up on the screen. He was just outside Moscow in the command control center, and the screens flashed red and said, America's just launched a nuclear attack on us. You've got 5 minutes to retaliate. And by the code book, he should have pressed the button that fired the Russian missiles back at America. But he didn't believe it. He wanted visual proof from Russian planes in the sky over Alaska before he would press the button. And they weren't able to provide it. And in fact, it turns out the whole thing was a mistake. There were no American missiles. But we came that close to, and it came down to the moral decision of one man in a bunker in Russia. Subsequently, a documentary film has been made about that. And then there were other incidents. The same thing happened with the Americans. They thought Russia had launched a huge attack on them. And the chap on duty, the defense guy, was supposed to retaliate. He did the same. He wanted visual confirmation and proof, because the radar were all saying, yeah, there's an attack coming. Anyway, he held out, and it turned out that it was a 50-cent little bit of electronics that had malfunctioned in the vast equipment system of the States, nuclear launch systems. One tiny thing had malfunctioned and caused this false alarm. And again, he had this critical decision, should I fire back or not? He again chose not to. But how do we know that, we've been very lucky, is what the documentary film is saying. The other thing that's really scary about this film is it shows footage of hydrogen bomb explosions, thermonuclear weapons. I mean, if Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bad enough, it killed tens of thousands of people. in an instant in those two cities. Thermonuclear weapons, which are caused by fusion instead of fission, are much, much more powerful. And they can incinerate an entire city like London or Paris, just one thermonuclear weapon, or Moscow or Petersburg or wherever. And the world is poised to do that to each other. So I'm one of those anti-nuclear weapons campaigners. I have been since I went on a CND march when I was 6 with my mother, and we saw Bertrand Russell, who was then president of Philosophers for Peace. So I'm coordinator of Philosophers for Peace. I've inherited Bertrand Russell's mission, which is to prevent Armageddon, to prevent self-destruction through nuclear war. And anyway, this documentary is very sobering, and it's done in the background to the Russian-Ukraine war, because Russia and Putin kind of lost the plot in invading Ukraine, which had voluntarily given up its nuclear weapons, thinking we don't need it, we're a civilized world, nobody will attack us. And they actually signed a security treaty with Russia, with America, with Britain as co-signatories, saying we will guard your security, nobody will attack you if you give up these nuclear weapons. So Ukraine did, and Russia has not adhered to that. Russia has then created all kinds of fake reasons and dissimulations to then break every rule in international law and invade a sovereign country that had voluntarily given up its nuclear weapons. And it occasionally sort of threatens, that unless it surrenders, it will use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. That is just immoral from a philosophical perspective. It would make Kant's hair turn white and him to turn his grave to see that kind of nonsense going on. So, yeah, we've got a problem on our hands. Statistically, we have to get rid of these weapons, but how can we do that unless we change minds and hearts? And people become more intelligent, more wise. That's the race against time. Einstein said a brilliant quote. He said, the only thing sort of saving us from mutual self-destruction is our moral intelligence. And our duty, therefore, as human beings, is to really develop our moral intelligence now. We know enough about the intricacies of physics. We don't need more physics. There can't be a technological fix for peace. It has to be a moral transformation of humanity. And that's why I'm working with Philosophers for Peace to do that. Okay, so there we are. Slightly, yeah. And to me, Christianity, the point of Easter is to give hope to people. This is the day we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. However you interpret that, you can be a humanist and say, well, he wasn't dead on the cross, he was just taken down half, groggy, and they'd given him a nice drug to put him in a coma, and then he came to life. You can do that humanist thing, that's fine. Scientifically, we don't know. But I think myself, there's enough evidence that something strange happened, and that he did come back to life, and against all expectations, because the Roman state thought it had destroyed this rebel, this teacher, but it was unstoppable. Those teachings lived on, and he continued. So I thought we'd start this philosophy club with something slightly different, therefore. Normally we would do the periodic table, which is, jolly good fun, but I'm going to share here a French copy of the Gospels, Les Quatre Évangiles. It's in French. And I'm going to ask my guests if you could just open a page at random and put your finger on a sentence or a paragraph, and then read it aloud in French, and I'll do a sort of interpretation of it according to my understanding.
Guérison d'un paralytique. C'est l'évangile selon saint Marc, 2e chapitre, verset 17. Comme après quelque temps il était rentré à Capharnaüm, on apprit qu'il était à la maison. Et il s'y rassembla tant de monde qu'il n'y avait plus de place, même devant la porte. Et il leur annonçait la parole. On vint lui amener un paralytique, porté par 4 hommes. Comme ils ne pouvaient pas le lui présenter en raison de la foule, ils défirent le toit au-dessus de l'endroit où il se trouvait et, ayant creusé un trou, ils firent descendre le grabat où gisait le paralytique. Jésus, voyant leur foi, dit au paralytique : Mon enfant, tes péchés sont remis. Or, il y avait là dans l'assistance quelques scribes qui pensaient en eux-mêmes. Comment celui-là peut-il parler ainsi? Il blasphème. Qui peut remettre les péchés sinon Dieu seul?
Okay, that's enough. We'll pause there. Can I have it? Okay, just for my English speakers that may not follow that. This is a very famous passage from the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 2. Mark's style is very succinct, Spartan, laconic. He just goes right to the point. Doesn't embellish the text with metaphors and nice pictures. He just tells the story, narrative. So it's set in the northern shores of Galilee, Lake Galilee, which I've been to a place called Capernaum, which historically existed at that time as a thriving town. And it's where Jesus' main base was with his core disciples, Peter, Andrew, and so on. And he's already been going around healing people and causing trouble. He did an exorcism. And so people have heard that he's about. So he goes to Capernaum hoping for a rest, I suppose. But then loads of people are pressing to come and see him, be healed, hear from him. And this is brought home in a brilliant television series that's being made at the moment called The Chosen, which I strongly recommend. It's one season is on Netflix. The whole 3 seasons are on its own website called Angel Studios. For free, you can watch it. And it's made by actors following the Gospels pretty straightforwardly, but you see it in 3D in real time as if you're there in first century Palestine. And this scene is brilliantly done. So they're in the house of Peter and his wife, and people want to sort of hear his teaching and find out more, and maybe some of them want to touch him, or they thought he was a magic healer. And there's such a press they couldn't get anywhere near. So this group have a paralyzed person, and they lower him down from the roof. It's brilliantly done in the film, in The Chosen. And Jesus deals with it, sort of improvising, and basically tells this paralytic that it's time to stop being a paralytic. And he persuades him to stand up and walk, and he does in the film. He can't believe it. He says, hugs Jesus, bursts into tears, and then leaves. And in the film, there's a bunch of official rabbis, or various forms of Pharisees who are wearing distinctive clothes. They wear a costume to prove that they're holy men, watching this whole incident. And they're muttering to themselves that this is blasphemy, you can't do that. Because in the doing of it, Jesus says to the paralyzed man, he cures him and he says, look, your sins are forgiven. We don't know, obviously, what those sins were. We don't know what was going on in the mind of that paralytic. But often when one is ill, one does feel it's something I must have done. And it forces you into a sort of self-reflection. If you get a really bad flu, or you feel you're about to die, it often feels that, oh God, what have I done? I think what Jesus was saying is, look, it's not something you've done. You can let yourself go. It's not about guilt here. And I think Jesus was a master healer, obviously. How is as a matter for scientific research. There are people that do spiritual healing now on this planet. I've met some. They're amazing. How it works, I don't know. Scientific friends of mine have studied the aura and how you can build up a sort of energy charge which has this capacity to heal people. I've seen it done myself, so I think that's what's going on here. I think Jesus had spent so much time in prayer, fasting, meditation, spirituality, exploring, that he had that gift. He was like a conduit. I don't think he was doing the healing. I think it was God working through him was. And if you don't believe in God, we can say that the Supreme Spirit, the Holy Spirit. But these teachers of the law were grumbling and saying this is a blasphemy. But Jesus replies and says, he sort of asks them a question, because he can pick up what they're thinking and they're muttering. It says, he knew in his spirit what they were thinking in their hearts, and he said to them, why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or say, get up, take your mat and walk? In other words, it's a question of, how you heal somebody and how you frame it to them. But I think what to me this little passage that we've just shared is an archetypal moment. As a Jungian, I see history reflected in moments when archetypal energies are invoked. So we have someone here, a free healing man of God, a spiritually charged person who wants to help people for free. He's not charging for this. It's not a business. He's doing it for love, right? And the system, the religious authorities in this case, are out to get him for it, because the system of the world depends on control, money, power, taxation, and certification. I mean, one of the questions I've got, and it's a serious question I've never seen answered, is Jesus is referred to as a rabbi often in the text. Did he do a training as a rabbi ever? What was the training for a Galilean sage in those days? Nowadays, I mean, I've met many rabbis in my time, and they have to go to rabbi school. They learn the Talmud, they learn all kinds of stuff. They're tested, they're given a junior place in a synagogue, and they have to prove they can do it, that they've got the right. Now, I don't know what the rabbinical training was in the time of Jesus, but it's very probable that whatever it was controlled from Jerusalem by the Sanhedrin, and they hadn't given him the requisite bits of paper or parchment or whatever. He was like a free rabbi, you could say. And of course that's always a threat to the systems that control our spirituality through monitoring and enforcing certain codes of behaviour and so on. Another thing Jesus is getting into trouble with on other occasions is he's doing healings on the Sabbath. And according to the extreme religious law of the time of the Pharisees, you can't do that because God says no work on the Sabbath. And Jesus was saying, when he's confronted with this, he says, yeah, but that's the old way of thinking. We're talking about spirit takes precedence, love takes precedence over law. And so the law may say that, but the law is nonsense, so we're going to just do the healing anyway. Now that's a free spirit speaking. And that's why I admire Jesus' attitude. I think it's profound, and it's an archetypal moment, and we're still struggling with that. There are people around this planet right now in prison because they fell out with the authorities for doing something illegal, but actually it was spirit driven or love driven. We're almost getting to the point where it's illegal to do things for love. You have to do things officially with a piece of paper saying you can do it. Well, I think Jesus stood against all that nonsense. And that's what this Easter Saturday reminds us. Okay, so that's the first one. Let's do another one. If you want to choose, just open at random, finger on a passage, and we'll ask our French speaker to read it.
This way?
Yeah.
Or bottom? This one.
L'Évangile selon saint Luc, chapitre 7, verset 4.
Okay.
Nécessité de la pratique. Pourquoi m'appelez-vous Seigneur, Seigneur, et ne faites-vous pas ce que je dis? Quiconque vient à moi écoute mes paroles et les met en pratique. Je vais vous montrer à qui il ressemble. Il ressemble à un homme qui, bâtissant une maison, a creusé profond et posé les fondations sur le roc. La crue survenant, le torrent s'est rué sur cette maison, mais il n'a pu l'ébranler, car elle était bien bâtie. Celui-là, au contraire, qui a écouté et n'a pas mis en pratique, ressemble à un homme qui aurait bâti sa maison à même le sol, sans fondation. Les flots se sont rués sur elle, et aussitôt elle s'est écroulée. Et le désastre survenu à cette maison a été grand.
Yeah, thank you. So this is the Gospel of St. Luke, and it's from chapter 7, verse 4. No, 40. Sorry. It's actually chapter 6, verse 40, if I can find that. Yes, so in English he says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? So I think this is Jesus getting slightly frustrated with his disciples and students and hearers who are like hero worshipping him too much. I think this is the irony of history. He didn't actually want to be hero worshipped at all. He wanted people to get what he was saying and then do it. And it would have transformed, revolutionised the world. We would have had a world of peace. We wouldn't have a world of nuclear weapons and Third World War if people had actually done what he was saying, which is love one another, be peace-loving, be compassionate. You know, some people say he was like a bodhisattva. I've read books that claim he was a reincarnated bodhisattva from the Vajrayana lineage who then reincarnated into that first century Palestine to kind of take on the hatred of the world and convert it to love. It seems to me that's something that was going on there. But people didn't get the message. They said, oh, it's the king, it's the Messiah, let's build a palace, let's get an army, let's make him emperor, you know. And so Jewish nationalists all misinterpreted what was going on as to mean he was going to defeat the Romans, he was going to take over the world and rule it, and etc. And then others just thought, you know, the hero worshipped him, so they called him Lord, Lord. He's grumbling here and saying, why do you do that if you don't actually do what I'm saying, if you don't follow my instructions? Look, I'll give you a parable, he says, and he's always using parables. He thinks laterally. He uses pictures a lot. He says, someone that does this, they hear me and puts them into, actually does what I say. That's like someone who builds a house, builds the foundations, builds it on rock, and actually has like got a solid base there. So when the storm comes, the floods, the rain, the house won't be shaken, it will stand. Because it's your actions, your karma now is becoming purified. Because you're actually, you know, living according to the laws of karuna, compassion and love. However, if somebody just says the words, Lord, Lord, but doesn't do it, that's like somebody that builds a house, you know, on the ground without a foundation. And it's not going to last. I mean, here in La Creuse, we have pretty fierce storms in the winter. Fierce windstorms, and where I lived in the castle in Scotland, unbelievable 100-mile-an-hour windstorms. Fortunately, I was in a castle made of strong rock, built on rock, and it didn't fall down. But can you imagine having a little flimsy little house with no foundation? It would have fallen. So that's the point of what Jesus is saying there anyway. It's just common sense. A lot of these Christian teachings in the evangelists are just common sense. And but they can be looked at in a very deep way. The more you develop your spirituality in whatever form you advance that in, and there are, you know, all the possibilities here of the periodic table you can explore. You will find that these little teachings of Christ are actually quite deep and meaningful. I think that's what Jesus said. Also, there's another passage. He says, no one comes to the Father except through me. That's another later saying. What he was meaning by that is, if you go on the spiritual path, you will end up facing the same stuff I've had to go through. Rudolf Steiner, in his interpretation of the Gospel, says the same thing. You know, you will face your own crucifixion. You will face your own attacks and assaults. People will come to you and accuse you of being, you know, whatever, a rebel. But Christ is saying, just carry on right through to the end. You know, keep the faith, and the house will stand. Anyway, it's a beautiful little passage. Let's just do one more. We'll do 3 because 3 is a holy number in the Christian faith. And my cat wants to choose one, but I won't let her.
This is a quite long part.
Which
Uh,
book is it?
I pointed here, but I have to start here.
No, just do that paragraph.
Okay.
Yeah, start with that.
So
I put
this is from Luke
Hmm.
1:1, just the
11.
beginning of Luke.
Okay.
Zacharie dit à l'ange, « Qu'est-ce qui m'assurera, car je suis un vieillard et ma femme est avancée en âge ?» L'ange lui répondit, « Je suis Gabriel, qui me tient devant Dieu, et j'ai été envoyé pour te parler et t'apporter cette bonne nouvelle. Eh bien, tu vas être réduit au silence et sans pouvoir parler jusqu'au jour où ces choses arriveront, pour n'avoir pas cru à mes paroles, lesquelles s'accompliront en leur temps. » Le peuple cependant attendait Zacharie et s'étonnait qu'il s'attardât dans le sanctuaire. Mais quand il sortit, il ne pouvait leur parler et ils comprirent qu'il avait eu quelques visions dans le sanctuaire. Pour lui, il leur faisait des signes et demeurait muet. Son temps de service achevé, il s'en retourna chez lui. Quelque temps après, sa femme Élisabeth conçut, et elle se tint cachée 5 mois durant. « Voilà donc, se disait-elle, ce qu'a fait pour moi le Seigneur, au temps où il lui a plu d'enlever ce qui causait ma honte parmi les hommes. »
Right. Thank
C'est
you.
Luc 1,19. Ouais.
Yeah. This is a beautiful story, actually, an interesting one. It's about Zachary, or Zacharias, who's the father of John the Baptist, who was a cousin of Jesus. And Zachariah was a priest who served in the temple in Jerusalem. So part of the inner coterie of the Jerusalem establishment. And he was an elder man. The Gospel of Luke is more historical than the others. It gives a lot of background detail. It's more like a history. And it's very interesting. I just read a book over Christmas by a fascinating author, S.P. Laurie, who's done an awful lot of research and reckons he's worked out who wrote the Gospel of Luke. Not St. Luke, it turns out, according to Laurie, but an aristocratic Roman woman called Domitilla, who was actually the niece of the emperor and was from the very highest level of aristocratic people in Rome at the time, and that she and her husband were sympathetic to the Christians who were being persecuted, and she wanted to know all about it, so she researched it using her classical education. She was a highly intelligent woman, and then wrote it as a gospel, but she couldn't put her name to it or she would have been killed because it was illegal to be a Christian, and she called it the Gospel of Luke. This is the theory. I think the book's worth reading. I don't think we know enough. I don't think we can say he's proved it 100%, but he certainly proved it. There's an argument to have there. But the point is that she knew Christians who'd known Jesus, who'd known Peter, who'd known, and probably Luke was a friend of hers in Rome at that time. The sad story is that soon after that, she was in fact arrested for treason and executed or killed, and her husband was as well. And the emperor, I think it was Domitian, basically went bonkers and started persecuting Christians big time, having them killed, tortured to death and all that stuff.